The air was a knife edge of cold, shearing through thin, torn fabric. Snow, fine as dust, swirled in the skeletal remains of what had been a Pullman car. Eleanor lay trapped, her leg pinned beneath a twisted metal beam, the initial shock giving way to a searing, white-hot agony that stole her breath. The screams had mostly faded now, replaced by the mournful groan of tortured metal settling in the unforgiving stillness. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes, mingling with the coppery smell of blood and the acrid tang of burnt wood. She was surrounded by ruin, a landscape of splintered timber and mangled iron, shrouded in a blizzard that showed no sign of relenting. Despair, cold and heavy as the snow settling on her face, threatened to consume her entirely. It wasn't just the physical pain, the crushing weight on her limb, but the profound, desolate loneliness that settled in the marrow of her bones. She had been traveling west, seeking a new start after everything. This was not the new start she had envisioned. This was the end of the line, literal and perhaps final. Her breath feathered in ragged gasps, each one a small, desperate prayer against the biting cold. Through blurry eyes, she saw figures moving like ghosts in the swirling snow. Survivors, injured, lost. One figure stood out, taller, moving with a quiet, unhurried purpose amidst the chaos. He was clad in dark, weathered clothes, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He didn't call out, didn't rush to any one person. He simply moved, assessing, his presence a strange, silent anchor in the maelstrom. Fear pricked at her. Was he a survivor? Or something worse, drawn by the disaster? The wilderness was vast and indifferent, and men could be as cruel as the elements. But then she saw him heave a heavy piece of debris off a trapped woman, saw the careful way he knelt, checking for injuries. He worked with a quiet competence that spoke not of malice, but of a grim, practical knowledge of survival. Still, a knot of apprehension tightened in Eleanor's gut. She was helpless, exposed, at the mercy of whoever happened upon her. Her life, already precarious, felt as fragile as the thin ice forming on a puddle beside her head. The storm intensified, the wind howling its mournful dirge through the wreckage. The cold was a tangible entity now, creeping into her limbs, threatening to numb the pain, yes, but also to steal her consciousness, her very life force. She closed her eyes for a moment, the images of her past flashing before her. A life of quiet desperation, culminating in loss and flight. Was this truly to be the end? Pinioned in the snow, alone among the dead and dying? A sudden movement nearby startled her eyes open. The tall figure was standing over her now, his silhouette dark against the gray sky. He didn't speak. He just looked down at her, his gaze unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not pity, not cruelty, but a sort of weary recognition. Then, without a word, he knelt beside her, his hands, large and calloused, moving towards the beam trapping her leg. A fresh wave of terror, primal and sharp, shot through her. What was he doing? Was this the moment the other shoe dropped? The moment she became just another casualty, cleaned out by a scavenger? But his movements were measured, strong. He braced himself against the twisted metal, testing its weight, its angle. He wasn't reaching for her meager possessions. He was looking at the problem, calculating. Her breath hitched in her throat. Survival wasn't a gentle thing. It was brutal, messy, and often depended on the kindness or capability of strangers. And in this desolate place, under this unforgiving sky, this silent stranger was her only hope. She watched him, every muscle tense, the cold seeping deeper, and waited for his next move. The fate of her leg, her life, hanging precariously in the balance. The wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her eyes, but she didn't flinch. She just watched him, this man of shadows and silence, and held onto a fragile thread of hope that felt dangerously like desperation. He grunted, a low, guttural sound of effort, and began to heave. Days blurred into a cold, hungry continuum within the makeshift shelter carved from the least damaged section of a carriage. The silent man, Silas, had managed to free her leg with surprising strength and ingenuity, his actions punctuated only by necessary commands or observations about the weather, the dwindling supplies, the state of the other survivors. There were only a handful left now, huddled together, bound by shared trauma and the chilling realization of their isolation. Eleanor's leg was badly bruised, perhaps fractured, but Silas had splinted it with strips of salvaged wood and cloth, his hands rough yet capable. Pain was a constant companion, a dull throb beneath the tightly bound makeshift splint, but it was secondary to the gnawing emptiness in her stomach and the pervasive bone-deep chill. She watched Silas constantly. He was a man of few words, his face etched with lines that spoke of a hard life lived outdoors. He moved with an economy of motion, building up the small fire they nursed, rationing their meager findings, a few cans of food, some blankets, a partial crate of biscuits. He hunted small game, emerging from the snow-laden woods with a stoic expression, carrying a rabbit or a bird he'd managed to snare or shoot. His skill was evident, and she knew, with a certainty that both reassured and unnerved her, that their survival rested almost entirely on his shoulders. Her initial fear of him had slowly begun to dissipate, replaced by a wary respect. He wasn't cruel, not in his actions towards them. He was simply detached, a man alone even when surrounded by others. He never spoke of his own past, never offered comfort, but his actions provided the only real safety they had. Eleanor, despite her injury, found strength she hadn't known she possessed. Pain was a motivator. Seeing the helplessness of the others, a frail, elderly couple, a young boy orphaned by the wreck, spurred her into action. She couldn't walk, but she could tend the fire, distribute the meager food Silas provided, offer quiet words to soothe trembling nerves. Her focus shifted from her own plight to the immediate needs of those around her. It was a distraction from her own pain, yes, but also a way to reclaim a sense of purpose in a world that had been utterly dismantled. She would hobble on her makeshift crutch, fashioned by Silas from a splintered piece of carriage frame, tending to their small, fragile community. She noticed the way Silas watched her sometimes, his dark eyes following her movements from across the fire. There was no judgment in his gaze, just observation. It was unsettling, yet also strangely comforting. It felt like being seen, truly seen, without the weight of expectation or disappointment that had characterized her previous life. She found herself wondering about him, where he came from, why he was traveling, what lay behind the stoic mask. But she didn't ask. Questions felt intrusive in this space defined by silence and necessity. One afternoon, a sound drifted through the snow-laden air, not the wind, not the groan of metal, but something different, distant yet distinct. Silas froze, his head cocked, listening. His body tensed, becoming utterly still. Eleanor saw a flicker of something new in his eyes, caution, vigilance, something akin to alarm. The sound came again, clearer this time. Voices, not the desperate cries of survivors, but rough, guttural shouts. And the jingle of harness. Riders, coming towards the wreck. A cold dread pooled in Eleanor's stomach, different from the cold of the snow or the fear of starvation. This was the fear of men of intent. Silas turned, his gaze meeting hers across the fire. In that brief moment, the detachment was gone. His eyes held a warning, a shared understanding of the potential danger. He didn't need to speak. Eleanor knew with chilling certainty that their fight for survival had just entered a new, and potentially far more dangerous, phase. The elements were brutal but predictable. Men were not, and the kind of men drawn to a wreck in the middle of nowhere were rarely the kind who offered help. Silas rose silently, moving towards the entrance of their fragile shelter, disappearing into the swirling snow, his form blending seamlessly with the harsh landscape that had become their temporary, perilous home. Eleanor watched him go, a surge of fear mingling with a strange, nascent trust. He was their protector now, their shield against whatever or whoever was out there. The air inside the makeshift shelter grew heavy with unspoken tension. Silas returned from his reconnaissance like a wraith, shaking snow from his hat and coat, his face grim. "3 of 'em," he stated, his voice low and rough, a rare breaking of his usual silence. "Scavengers. Seen 'em before. They'll pick the wreck clean, then maybe look for anything the survivors have." He looked at the few huddled figures. "We ain't got much, but a fire, some canned goods. It's something worth talking to folk like them." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. These were not desperate men seeking aid. They were predators drawn to weakness and opportunity. Silas moved with renewed urgency, reinforcing the entrance with more debris, piling snow against the sides of their makeshift walls. He worked efficiently, silently, his actions speaking volumes. He was preparing for a confrontation. Eleanor, watching him, felt a surge of something beyond fear. She felt a fierce protectiveness towards the few remaining survivors, towards the fragile hope they represented, and, unexpectedly, towards Silas. This silent, capable man who had saved her and was now preparing to defend them all. She couldn't stand idly by. Her leg throbbed, but the pain was a distant echo compared to the fire building within her. "What can I do?" she asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Silas paused, looking at her, his gaze assessing. He seemed surprised by her offer, perhaps used to people cowering or hindering. He studied her for a moment, then nodded towards a pile of broken glass and sharp metal shards near a shattered window frame. "They might try that opening," he said. "Make it less inviting. Slow 'em down if they come through." It was a small task, something she could do while seated, but it felt significant. It was a way to contribute, to fight back. She crawled towards the opening, her bandaged leg protesting, and began meticulously placing the sharp debris, creating a crude, dangerous barrier. As she worked, Silas took up a position near the entrance, a length of pipe salvaged from the train held loosely in his hand. He was still, like a hunter waiting for prey, but there was no malice in his posture, only readiness. The wind outside picked up, covering the sounds of the approaching men. The waiting was the hardest part, a slow, agonizing crawl of seconds. Eleanor finished her task, looking at the jagged barrier she had created. It wasn't much, but it was something. She scooted back, positioning herself near the elderly couple, ready to shield them if needed. The air grew colder as the outside world pressed in. Then, a scraping sound, right outside the reinforced entrance. A voice, rough and demanding, called out, "Anyone in there? We're rescuers. Open up." It was a lie, thin and transparent as the snow outside. Silas remained silent, a shadow in the dim light filtering through the debris. The scraping intensified, followed by a muffled grunt of effort. They were trying to force their way in. Silas raised the pipe, his knuckles white. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the stillness. This was it, the moment they had to defend what little they had. The attack came sudden and brutal. The makeshift barrier at the entrance splintered inwards. Silas met the first man with a swift, sharp blow from the pipe. There was a cry of pain, a struggle in the narrow opening. Eleanor heard frantic scrambling at the window frame where she'd placed the glass. A hand appeared, reaching in, followed by a grunt of surprise and pain as it met the jagged shards. She felt a grim satisfaction. They were fighting back. Silas was a force of nature in the confined space, defending the entrance with quiet ferocity. Eleanor watched, mesmerized by his strength and skill, a stark contrast to his usual stillness. The sounds of struggle continued for a few moments, curses and grunts echoing in the small space, before fading as abruptly as they had begun. Silence descended again, heavy and fraught. Silas stood panting slightly, his gaze fixed on the ruined entrance. He listened intently for a long moment, then finally lowered the pipe. "They're gone," he said, his voice low. "Took one with them, maybe two. Won't be back tonight." He didn't say they were defeated, only that they wouldn't return tonight. The threat lingered, a shadow in the periphery, but for now, the immediate danger had passed. Eleanor sagged with relief, her muscles trembling. She looked at Silas, truly looked at him, and saw not a mysterious, possibly dangerous stranger, but a protector, a reluctant guardian in this frozen hellscape. A silent understanding passed between them, a shared knowledge forged in the crucible of violence and survival. In that moment, the desolate loneliness that had clung to her began to recede, replaced by a fragile, yet potent, sense of connection. The days following the confrontation held a different kind of stillness. The immediate threat had retreated, but the knowledge of it lingered, a cold reminder of the world outside their fragile sanctuary. They remained trapped by the snow and the remoteness of the location, but something fundamental had shifted within the small group. Fear still existed, a constant undercurrent, but it was tempered now by a shared resolve. Eleanor's leg, though still painful, was slowly healing. The makeshift splint held, a testament to Silas's practical skill. She could move more freely now, still hobbling, but able to assist more actively with the daily tasks of survival, maintaining the fire, rationing the dwindling supplies, offering comfort and quiet strength to the others. Her transformation was subtle, internal, yet profound. The vulnerability she had arrived with, the despair rooted in past loss, had been tempered by the harsh realities of the wreck and the fight that followed. She had faced death, faced cruelty, and found a strength she never knew she possessed. It wasn't a loud, demanding strength, but a quiet resilience, a stubborn refusal to yield. She no longer saw herself as helpless, waiting to be saved. She was a participant, a survivor capable and necessary. The relationship between Eleanor and Silas deepened, not through words, but through shared glances, silent acknowledgments of effort and mutual reliance. They worked together now, a quiet, efficient partnership forged in necessity. He would bring back game from the woods. She would prepare it over the fire. He would reinforce the shelter. She would tend to the needs of the others. There was a respect between them, an understanding that transcended conversation. He saw her resilience, her quiet determination, and she saw beneath his stoic exterior a profound sense of responsibility and a weary kindness. One evening, sitting by the fire as the wind howled outside, Silas spoke, unprompted. He didn't talk about his past, not directly, but he spoke of the land, of surviving in places where the world was indifferent to human suffering. His words were sparse, like dry kindling, but they ignited a sense of shared experience, a recognition that both of them carried burdens, seen and unseen. He was an outsider, yes, but he was also a man deeply connected to the harsh realities of the world, a connection Eleanor was only just beginning to forge herself. Hope arrived unexpectedly, not as a rescue train, but as a subtle shift in the weather. The blizzard eased, the sky cleared, revealing a breathtaking expanse of stars overhead, a sight they hadn't seen since the wreck. It was a sign, a promise of passage. Silas began making preparations for the journey out, estimating the distance to the nearest settlement, planning the route through the snow-covered wilderness. It would be arduous, dangerous, especially with injured survivors. But it was possible. Eleanor knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within her, that this journey was not just about reaching safety. It was about carrying the lessons learned in the wreckage forward. It was about the strength found in vulnerability, the connections forged in isolation, the quiet dignity of simply enduring. She looked at Silas, then at the vast, starlit sky, and felt a sense of quiet determination settle over her. The train wreck had shattered her world, stripping away everything familiar, everything she thought defined her. But in the process, it had revealed something essential, a core of resilience, an ability to face the worst and keep moving. She hadn't found a new start as she'd planned, but she had found something perhaps more valuable herself. And as they prepared to leave the wreckage behind, stepping out into the vast, uncertain landscape, she knew she wasn't alone. The journey wasn't over, but she was ready for it, stronger than she had ever been, walking forward not just beside Silas, but with him, a partnership born of fire and snow, carrying the quiet, indomitable spirit of survival.